forest surrounding Raven's Hollow was no ordinary woodland. Legend spoke of a void, a swirling abyss hidden deep within the trees. They said it whispered your name, pulling you closer until reality unraveled. When Cara, a skeptical journalist, ventured there to debunk the legend, she was armed with her camera, wit, and a deep desire for a story. The whispers began at dusk, faint and elusive. By nightfall, they were deafening, as though the forest itself was alive, twisting the darkness into tendrils of shadow that reached for her. Cara's flashlight flickered, revealing glimpses of something grotesque, rotting faces with hollow eyes peering from between the trees, their mouths moving in silent pleas. As she stumbled upon the void, the ground beneath her shifted like quicksand, pulling her closer. A skeletal figure emerged, its hollow sockets spilling black ichor, and it spoke her name in a voice that echoed with thousands of screams. It wasn't just the dead trapped here, it was time itself, replaying horrors for eternity. Each step closer to escape brought her into another nightmare, walking corpses stitched together, spectral children crying blood, and whispers of her darkest fears. The void was inescapable, it wanted her to feed its insatiable hunger for despair. Cara's final scream echoed through the forest as the void consumed her, her last image reflected in her abandoned camera, a distorted, hollow version of herself. The legend of the whispering void would grow, but no one who entered would live to tell the truth. The void swallowed Cara, pulling her into an endless darkness that pressed against her chest like a suffocating weight. She clawed at the nothingness, her screams absorbed by the silence around her. When her eyes adjusted, she realized she wasn't in complete darkness. A faint, pulsing light emanated from all directions, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was thick, humming with whispers that slithered into their words unintelligible but laden with malice. She staggered forward, her trembling hands outstretched. The ground beneath her felt slick, like decayed flesh. The light intensified, revealing grotesque figures writhing in the distance. Human-like but twisted, their limbs contorted unnaturally, their faces frozen in expressions of eternal torment. One of them turned its head toward her, its hollow sockets oozing a dark, tar-like substance, and let out a guttural groan. The figures began to move, dragging themselves closer with jerky, unnatural motions. Cara backed away, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. As she turned, she saw something far worse. The void had reshaped itself into a massive, undulating maw, lined with razor-sharp shadows that glistened like teeth. It inhaled deeply, the force pulling at her body, threatening to rip her from the ground. A voice, deep and resonant, boomed from the void, shaking the ground. It spoke her name, elongating each syllable as if savoring its taste. "You are mine," it hissed, each word sending shivers down her spine. Her mind reeled, and fragments of memories not her own flooded her thoughts, images of people consumed by the void, their bodies twisted and devoured, their souls left to wander in endless torment. Desperation overtook her as she stumbled across an object in the muck, a journal, ancient and weathered, its pages brittle but legible. The scrawled handwriting spoke of a ritual, a way to confront the void and escape. The instructions were cryptic: offer it a piece of yourself, something irreplaceable. Cara's mind raced. What could she give? Her memories? Her sanity? The whispers grew louder, now distinctly calling her name, their tone both mocking and seductive. The figures encircled her, their bony fingers reaching out, their touch icy and searing all at once. The void loomed closer, its maw stretching wider, revealing an endless abyss lined with faintly glowing, screaming faces. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she screamed into the void, "Take my fear. Take it and leave me be." For a moment, silence enveloped her. The void paused, as if considering her offer, before letting out a guttural roar. It wasn't enough. It wanted more. A figure emerged from the shadows, its face horrifyingly familiar. It was Cara, a twisted, hollow version of herself, grinning maniacally. The doppelganger stepped forward, mimicking her movements, whispering her darkest thoughts. "You'll never escape," it hissed. "The void is part of you now." Cara's knees buckled as the realization hit her. The void didn't want her to escape, it wanted her to become part of it. With one last, desperate effort, she tore the journal apart, screaming the ritual's words in defiance. The void shrieked, its maw collapsing inward, pulling everything into a cyclone of shadow and light. When the chaos subsided, Cara awoke in the forest, the whispers gone, the void nowhere in sight. She stumbled back to civilization, hollow-eyed and trembling. But the whispers never truly left. At night, when the world was silent, she could still hear her name, faint and distant, carried on the wind. Cara tried to live a normal life, but normality slipped further away each day. The world around her seemed warped, as if reality itself had been tainted by her time in the void. Shadows stretched too long, whispers followed her even in crowded rooms, and reflections in mirrors lingered a moment too long, their expressions subtly twisted. She stopped sleeping, too afraid of the nightmares that dragged her back into that infinite darkness. Even in her waking hours, she sometimes felt the pull, the sensation of the void's gaping maw waiting just behind her, ready to consume her whole. The journal haunted her too, though it had disintegrated in her hands after the ritual. Sometimes she caught glimpses of its torn pages lying in the corners of her room, vanishing when she blinked. Then the disappearances began. People she knew, her neighbors, her co-workers, even strangers she passed on the street, started vanishing without a trace. One by one, they simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only faint echoes of their presence, an untouched coffee cup, a still warm chair. She began seeing them in her dreams, their faces contorted. Their voices pleading for help as they reached for her from the endless black. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, the whispers returned with a vengeance. This time, they weren't distant or fragmented. They were right there, filling the room, speaking in unison. "You brought it here," they said. "You are the doorway." Cara's heart pounded as the walls around her began to distort, twisting and rippling like liquid. The lights flickered, plunging the room into intermittent darkness. When the light reflection in the window wasn't her own. It was her doppelganger again, the twisted version of herself she had seen in the void. It smiled, its teeth unnaturally sharp, as it placed a hand against the glass. Before Cara could react, the doppelganger stepped through, its body warping and stretching unnaturally as it entered her world. It moved closer, its movements jerky and wrong, its hollow eyes locked onto hers. "You can't run," it said, its voice layered with hundreds of others. "The void is hungry." Cara stumbled backward, grabbing the nearest object, a lamp, and hurling it at the thing. The lamp shattered, but the doppelganger didn't flinch. Instead, it raised a hand. And the shadows in the room surged forward like living entities, wrapping around Cara's wrists and ankles, pinning her in place. The whispers grew deafening as the void began to manifest, its maw opening in the center of her living room. Faces emerged from the swirling darkness, screaming silently, their mouths stretched impossibly wide. The doppelganger leaned in close, its breath cold and fetid. "You belong to it now," it whispered. With a surge of desperation, Cara remembered the journal's cryptic words about offering something irreplaceable. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pocket, pulling out a locket that had belonged to her late mother. "Take this," she screamed, her voice cracking. "It's all I have left." The void paused, the swirling shadows stilling for a brief moment. The doppelganger tilted its head, as if considering the offer. Then it laughed, a sound so inhuman and guttural it made Cara's skin crawl. "It's not enough," it hissed. "It will never be enough." The shadows tightened around her, pulling her closer to the void's gaping maw. As she fought against the pull, tears streaming down her face, she realized the truth. The void didn't want an object. It wanted her soul, her essence, everything that made her who she was. The last thing Cara saw before the void consumed her entirely was her doppelganger, standing motionless, its hollow eyes watching as she disappeared into the black. As the void sealed itself, the whispers faded, leaving only silence. Days later, Cara's apartment was found empty, her belongings untouched. Yet, if one stood in the right corner of the room and listened carefully, they might hear faint whispers calling her name, carried on the edges of an unseen void. the void was not the end for Cara. It was merely the beginning. She awoke in a place that defied all logic, a vast, colorless expanse filled with endless, shifting shapes. The air hummed with energy, and the ground beneath her feet felt both solid and liquid at once. She tried to move, but her body no longer felt like her own, as if the void had stripped away pieces of her, leaving only fragments behind. Around her, the shapes began to take form. They weren't structures or landscapes but memories, her own, twisted and corrupted. She saw herself as a child, standing in her mother's kitchen, but the scene was wrong. Her mother's eyes were black voids, her mouth twisted into a grotesque grin as she whispered, "You shouldn't have come back." The vision dissolved, replaced by another, a hallway from her childhood home, stretching endlessly into darkness. Something moved at the far end, a shade had Cara now, completely and utterly, but it wasn't finished with her. She was its vessel, a tether between its infinite hunger and the fragile world she once called home. Each passing moment, if time could even be measured here, stripped more of her humanity, replacing it with an endless, gnawing desire. She could feel the void's whispers weaving through her mind, threading its purpose into her soul. The figure in shadows appeared again, its featureless face closer now, more oppressive. "You've seen the truth," it said, its voice like cracking ice. "You know the hunger. Feed it, or it will consume you." Cara's surroundings shifted violently. The void bent reality, casting her back into the world she had fled. But she was no longer herself. She stood on the edge of the forest where the threshold opened into the void, her body cold and translucent, as if she were caught between existence and oblivion. The forest was silent, unnaturally so, and the air carried a suffocating weight. Ahead of her, a group of hikers walked cautiously, their voices breaking the oppressive quiet. They carried flashlights, their beams flickering as if struggling against some unseen force. Cara felt the void's pull, urging her forward. She tried to resist, to scream a warning, but her voice came out as a low, inhuman whisper. The hikers froze, their lights swinging wildly as they tried to locate the source of the sound. One of them, a young woman with wide, terrified eyes, pointed directly at Cara. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice trembling. Cara stepped forward against her will, her movements smooth and predatory. The hikers began to back away, but the forest twisted around them, the trees elongating and closing in like skeletal fingers. The void was sealing them in, its prey caught in its web. One of the hikers, a man with a heavy pack, turned to run, but his scream was cut short as the ground beneath him gave way. He fell into blackness, his flashlight tumbling after him, its beam swallowed by the abyss. The others shouted his name, panic rising, but their voices were drowned out by the whispers. Cara could feel the void's hunger growing, its energy coursing through her like molten fire. Her hand extended toward the young woman, who was paralyzed with fear, her flashlight shaking. "Please," the woman whispered. "Don't," the void answered through Cara, her voice layered and unrecognizable. "You shouldn't have come." The shadows surged forward, wrapping around the hikers like living chains. Their screams echoed briefly before the void consumed them, leaving only silence and the faint, lingering scent of decay. Cara fell to her knees. Tears streaming down her translucent cheeks, but the void wasn't done. It showed her the faces of the hikers now trapped within its endless expanse, their terror and agony etched into eternity. Each face was a reminder, a warning, and a promise. This was her purpose now. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just the void's voice anymore, they were hers. They called to more victims, luring them to the threshold with promises of forbidden knowledge, adventure, or salvation. As the forest reclaimed its unnatural stillness, Cara stood once more. The void surged within her, its hunger insatiable. She was its harbinger now, its voice in the world of the living, and as another group of travelers approached the forest, oblivious to the horrors awaiting them, Cara felt a grim satisfaction. The void whispered through her, echoing its eternal promise, no one escaped. Travelers were drawn to the forest edge as if compelled by an unseen force. There were 3 of them this time, 2 men and a woman, each carrying heavy backpacks and speaking in hushed tones about rumors of the cursed woods. Their laughter was nervous, forced, as though they felt the eyes of the void watching but dared not acknowledge it. Cara stood in the shadows, her translucent form blending seamlessly with the gnarled trees. She wanted to scream, to warn them to turn back, but her voice was no longer her own. It was the void's voice now, and when it spoke, it did so with the purpose of ensnaring. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice carrying on the wind. The travelers froze. "Did you hear that?" The woman asked, her hand tightening around her flashlight. "It's just the wind," one of the men said, though his voice trembled. "Keep moving." The void pulsed with anticipation, its whispers seeping into the travelers' minds. Cara felt the pull, the urge to lead them deeper, to let the forest close around them like a predator's jaws. Against her will, she stepped forward, her figure flickering in and out of visibility. The woman gasped, pointing toward Cara's ethereal form. "There's someone there!" She shouted, but the others saw only a faint shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt. Cara's hand raised involuntarily, beckoning them. The void sang through her, its whispers weaving promises of safety, secrets, and forbidden treasures. "Come closer," she murmured. The travelers hesitated, but the forest shifted around them, twisting paths and shadows until the only way forward was toward Cara. The void was relentless, its grip tightening, ensuring no escape. The first man stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. Cara tried to fight it, but the void surged within her, forcing her to speak. "I can help you," she said, her voice dripping with deceit. "There's a way out." The travelers exchanged uncertain glances but followed her. As they moved deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, heavier. The trees seemed alive, their twisted branches reaching out like claws. The ground beneath them softened, oozing with a dark, viscous liquid that clung to their boots. The whispers grew louder, filling their ears with fragmented voices, some pleading, others laughing, and many screaming. The travelers began to panic, their breaths quickening, their movements frantic. "I don't like this," the woman said, clutching the arm of the second man. "We need to go back." "There's no back," Cara said, her voice eerily calm. "Only forward." The void's presence grew stronger, the air around them distorting as if reality itself were unraveling. Suddenly, the first man cried out, falling to his knees. His flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam revealing something grotesque, a face emerging from the tree bark, its mouth open in a silent scream. "Help me!" he shouted, but as the others rushed to him, the ground beneath him split open, and shadowy tendrils erupted, dragging him into the abyss. His screams echoed briefly before fading into silence. The woman sobbed, her hands trembling as she clung to the second man. "What is this? What's happening?" Cara stepped closer, her face a mask of sorrow and inevitability. "You're in the void now," she said. "There's no escape." The remaining travelers turned to run, but the forest betrayed them. Paths disappeared, replaced by walls of impenetrable darkness. Shapes moved in the shadows, twisted, inhuman forms with too many limbs and too many eyes. The void was feeding, and it would not be denied. The second man tripped, his scream cut short as the shadows enveloped him. The woman was alone now, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She turned to Cara, her eyes filled with desperation. "Please," she begged. You reached out, her hand trembling. For a moment, her voice broke through the void's control. "Run," she whispered, but it was too late. The shadows surged forward, swallowing the woman whole. Her final scream lingered in the air before fading into the oppressive silence of the void. Cara collapsed to her knees, her translucent form flickering. The void pulsed around her, satisfied but still hungry. She could feel it digging deeper into her soul, turning her into something else entirely, its harbinger, its lure, its voice in the world of the living. And as the forest returned to its unnatural stillness, Cara's whisper echoed through the trees, a chilling promise to anyone who dared to come close. the void always takes what it's given. The void allowed no rest, no reprieve for Cara. Each soul consumed deepened its grip on her, tethering her to its insatiable hunger. She wandered the forest, caught between worlds, her thoughts fractured by whispers that never ceased. Time no longer held meaning, the cycle of luring and devouring blurred into one endless torment. The forest, once a place of natural beauty, was now a festering wound in reality. The trees bore grotesque faces, their mouths open in eternal screams. The ground squelched underfoot, soaked with the remnants of those who had fallen prey to the void. The air shimmered unnaturally, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and sharp. Like blood, Cara stumbled upon a clearing, her translucent form flickering as if in protest. In the center stood an old, crumbling altar, overgrown with thorny vines. It exuded a malevolent energy, its surface etched with runes that seemed to shift and writhe under her gaze. She felt the void's pull intensify, urging her closer. A memory surfaced, unbidden, a time before the void, before the whispers. She saw herself laughing with friends, the sun warm on her skin. But the memory twisted, darkened. Her laughter, her friends' faces contorted in terror as the void claimed them one by one. The whispers grew louder, drowning out her thoughts. "Bring them here," they commanded, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of dread. "Feed the altar. Complete the cycle." Before Cara could react, the forest shifted again. The air grew colder, and a group of campers appeared on the edge of the clearing. They were young, their faces alight with the thrill of adventure, their voices carrying over the oppressive silence. Cara felt the void stir within her, its hunger palpable. She tried to warn them, to push them away, but her body betrayed her. She stepped into the clearing, her translucent form shimmering in the moonlight. The campers froze, their laughter dying as they noticed her. Who are you?" One of them stammered, a young man with a flashlight trembling in his hand. Cara's mouth moved against her will. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice layered with the void's sinister tones. The campers exchanged uneasy glances, but the forest was already working against them. The trees closed in, their twisted branches forming an impenetrable wall. The air grew thick, stifling, and the whispers began to invade their minds. One of the campers, a girl with long, dark hair, screamed and pointed toward the trees. Faces began to emerge from the bark, their eyes hollow, their mouths gaping in silent agony. The campers panicked, scattering in all directions, but the forest allowed no escape. The void surged through Cara, forcing her to follow them. One by one, the campers were caught in its trap. A young man was pulled into the ground by shadowy tendrils, his screams echoing as he vanished into the abyss. Another was ensnared by the thorny vines, her body contorted unnaturally as they tightened around her. Cara found the dark-haired girl trembling near the altar, tears streaming down her face. "Please," the girl whispered. "I just want to—" For a moment, Cara's own voice broke through the void's control. "Run," she managed, her words strained and faint, but the void would not allow mercy. The girl's eyes widened as the shadows consumed her, her scream cut short as she was dragged into the altar. The runes flared with a sickly green light, and the whispers erupted into a deafening roar. The altar began to crack, releasing a torrent of darkness that spiraled upward, taking shape. A towering figure emerged, its body made of writhing shadows, its eyes burning with malevolent light. It turned its gaze to Cara, and she felt her soul tremble under its scrutiny. "You have served well," it said, its voice a rumble that shook the forest. "But your task is not yet complete." The figure extended a hand, and Cara felt the void's grip tighten around her. She realized, with chilling clarity, that she was no longer a person. She was an extension of the void, a tool to be used until there was nothing left of her. As the figure vanished into the shadows, Cara stood alone in the clearing, the whispers beginning anew. Somewhere, in the distance, voices echoed, more travelers, more prey. Cara drifted through the forest like a ghost, her feet never touching the ground. The whispers never ceased, their voices relentless, urging her to keep moving, keep luring. Each time she thought she had reached the limits of her despair. The void found new ways to torment her, breaking her spirit a little more. The forest shifted around her, alive with malice. Trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their bark splitting open to reveal hollow eyes and gaping mouths. The ground pulsed beneath her like a living thing, soft and cold, as though the earth itself recoiled from her presence. The void was changing her. She could feel it. Ahead, the faint flicker of a campfire broke the darkness. The glow seemed out of place in the endless night, a fragile bubble of warmth and life in the void. Cara stopped at the edge of the clearing, her translucent form blending with the shadows as she observed the new arrivals. There were two of them this time, a young couple, their laughter bright and carefree as they roasted marshmallows over the fire. They seemed oblivious to the unnatural silence, the way the forest pressed in around them like a predator stalking its prey. Cara fought the void's influence, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She stepped into the clearing, her figure flickering like a dying flame. The couple froze, their eyes widening as they caught sight of her. "Who's there?" The man called out, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound brave. Cara opened her mouth to warn them, but the void spoke through her instead. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low and filled with menace. The woman clutched the man's arm, her face pale. "Let's go," she whispered, but the forest was already closing in, the trees shifting to block their path. The fire flickered wildly, casting monstrous shadows that danced across the clearing. The whispers seeped into the air, filling their ears with words they couldn't understand but felt compelled to obey. "Stay," Cara said, the void twisting her voice into a command. "It's not safe to leave." The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Cara and the encroaching darkness. "What do you want from us?" he demanded. His voice breaking, Cara took a step closer, her heart aching with the knowledge of what was about to happen. "I don't want this," she whispered, her own voice finally breaking through. "But the void does." The shadows surged forward, tendrils of darkness wrapping around the man's legs and dragging him toward the trees. He screamed, clawing at the ground as his girlfriend tried in vain to pull him back. The void was merciless, its hunger insatiable. The woman turned to Cara, her eyes filled with terror and rage. "Why are you doing this?" His form flickered violently, the void's control slipping for a brief moment. "Run," she said, her voice a desperate plea, but the void would not be denied. The ground split open beneath the woman, and she fell into the darkness, her screams echoing as the earth swallowed her whole. The clearing fell silent, the fire snuffed out by an unseen force. Cara sank to her knees, the weight of her actions crushing her. The void pulsed around her, satisfied but never sated. It whispered promises of release, of an end to her torment, but she knew better. The void lied. It always lied. In the distance, she heard voices, more travelers drawn to the cursed forest, their fates already sealed. She wanted to scream, to warn them, but the void tightened its grip, silencing her. The forest seemed to breathe, its darkness alive with an unnatural pulse. Cara drifted further into its depths, her translucent figure an extension of the void's will. She was no longer a person, but a vessel, a harbinger of doom. Every step she took left the ground rotting, as if rejecting her existence. The whispers surged, more insistent now. The void spoke of another presence intruding upon its domain. This one was different, an older man, his aura strong and defiant. A hunter. Cara hesitated. The void writhed in response, its frustration an unbearable weight in her mind. It hated hesitation. Hated the remnants of her humanity that occasionally surfaced. But she couldn't help it. Something about this new arrival felt familiar, like a long-lost fragment of her forgotten past. She found him near a decrepit bridge, his flashlight piercing through the oppressive heavy with an unnatural stillness, a deceptive calm after the void's retreat. Cara leaned against her father, her body weak, her spirit tethered to the fragile light of the talisman. They moved slowly, each step away from the heart of the forest feeling like a battle against invisible chains. As they reached the remnants of the decrepit bridge, Cara stopped. Her father turned to her, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "We're almost out. You're free, Cara. The void can't have you anymore," but Cara shook her head, her gaze distant. "It's not that simple," she murmured. "It's still inside me. I feel it, waiting, whispering. If I leave, it will follow. It'll find another way to spread." Her father's grip tightened on her arm. "We'll fight it together. We'll find a way to destroy it." Tears welled in Cara's eyes, but her face was resolute. "No. It doesn't work that way. The void isn't just a thing, it's a part of this place, a part of me now. It can't be destroyed, only contained." Before he could respond, the talisman in his hand began to pulse violently, its runes glowing brighter. The void wasn't retreating, it was regrouping, growing stronger, its hunger more desperate than ever. The ground beneath them trembled, and the forest roared to life, shadows creeping toward them with renewed fury. Cara stepped back, her translucent form flickering. "Dad, you need to go. You need to get out of here, now." "No," he said firmly, his voice breaking. "I didn't come all this way to lose you again." "You won't," she whispered, her voice filled with a strange calm. "But I have to stay. The void needs an anchor, and I'm the only one it wants. If I go, it will find someone else. I can't let that happen." His face crumpled with grief, but he saw the determination in her eyes. "There has to be another way," he pleaded. She smiled sadly, reaching out to touch his face, her hand passing through him like mist. "You gave me back a piece of more than I ever thought I'd have. Now you need to live, for both of us." Before he could stop her, she stepped back into the shadows, the talisman glowing fiercely in her father's hand as if shielding him from the encroaching darkness. The void surged toward her, its whispers turning into an ecstatic roar, welcoming its vessel home. Cara stood tall, her figure luminous against the growing tide of darkness. "You want me?" she said, her voice ringing out, strong and defiant. "Then take me, but only me." The void hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if understanding her words. Then it lunged, its shadows wrapping around her, consuming her completely. The light from the talisman flared one last time, driving back the void's reach from her father and pushing him away from the forest's edge. He stumbled onto solid ground, gasping for air as the oppressive weight of the void vanished. Behind him, the forest was eerily silent. The shadows no longer moved, the trees standing still as if frozen in time. He called out for her, but there was no response. The talisman lay cold in his hand, its runes dimmed. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he realized the truth. Cara was gone, but her sacrifice had sealed the void, trapping it within her and keeping it from spreading further. As he looked back at the forest, he thought he saw a faint glow deep within the trees, a small, flickering light, as if Cara's spirit still lingered, holding the void at bay. He rose to his feet, clutching the talisman tightly, and turned away, vowing to honor her memory. The forest remained, dark and foreboding, its whispers silenced. But the void was patient. It would wait. And one day, it might find a crack in its prison, a way to reach out once more. For now, though, it was quiet. And in that quiet, Cara stood alone, the eternal sentinel of the whispering void.